We are very fortunate to have a panel of 4 industrial hygiene and safety subject matter experts to address your concerns regarding CTE class safety. 2 of these panelists have just given us amazing presentations from Labor and Industries. Joining the panelists, could all the panelists please turn on your cameras? So joining the list of panelists, we have Jerry Page. Jerry is a director for the Northeast Washington Educational Service District 101 in their Workers' Compensation Trust. He has 20 years of safety-based employment, experience as an industrial hygienist, and certification as an indoor environmentalist. He previously instructed high school career technical education shop programs and currently is a regional OSHA 10-hour and 30-hour authorized trainer in general industry. Mr. Page supports the health and safety of learning environments in pre-K through 12 schools by providing assessment and management services related to occupational and environmental health exposures. And then rounding out our group of panelists, we have Brandon Kemperman. Brandon is a Healthy Building Science Advisor with Public Health Seattle-King County. He has a master's degree in public health and a bachelor's in environmental science with certifications in industrial hygiene, school risk management, and playground safety. With 18 years of industrial hygiene, environmental science, and public health experience in the consulting, academic, and government sectors, he now serves as technical advisor for Public Health Seattle-King County K-12 School Environmental Health and Safety Program that covers 700 public and private schools in King County. When not focusing on environmental health and safety, Brandon loves spending time with his partner and 2 children outdoors in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, and his favorite hobby is photography. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. And let's see, one more note I had. So in preparation for the session, we reviewed email and meeting notes to identify CTE safety related questions we have received over the past several months. Based on this review, we consolidated the concerns into 5 general questions. I will pose these questions to our panelists. We welcome your involvement in chat if you would like additional clarification on responses or if you have additional questions. So I will start out the panel with our first question, which is, schools want the CTE classroom to mimic industry standards so the students come out with actual marketable skills. How can they do that when a lot of the materials are not safe for minors, such as paints, urethanes, and auto supplies like a parts washer? How can we obtain substitution recommendations, or what are your thoughts? Now we'll turn it over to the panelists. Would anyone like to tackle?
I can kick things off, Becky. Yeah, so to mimic the industry standards, really like the shops, the work sites, they need to implement the hierarchy of controls. So if they can eliminate those hazards, that's great. The next best is substitution. And so selecting and designing like ventilation systems and such as local exhaust ventilation can reduce airborne contaminant exposures like in the shop and then also in the workplace. If elimination or substitution isn't an option because of maybe like proprietary methods or materials that the worksite might be using, then they can use ventilation or other engineering controls to make sure that those exposures are prevented or minimized. With respect to substitution, there are some like online tools and resources available from like the EPA. They have Safer Choice website, and then also a tool that can maybe help select safer chemicals for various industries that the students might be involved in. And then OSHA also has a website for transitioning to safer chemicals, which is a toolkit for employers, then also workers. And that provides information about how to select those alternative chemicals and materials. And then alternatively, to find substitutions, they might reach out to, sometimes the schools actually have environmental health and safety professionals or a team that is part of the school district. You could reach out to L&I, like Cindy and Tom mentioned about the on-site consultations, and then other resources like local health jurisdictions as well. So those are my thoughts. Would love to hear others from Tom, Cindy, and Jerry.
Yeah, I can throw in here. So I think something that's very valid and important is when we're in our CTE programs is to do a regular assessment of the workspace. And so whether we have a new instructor coming in and facilitating learning, what happens a lot of times is it's, nobody wants to get rid of anything. Money's tight in school budgets. And so we see storage and collection of materials, whether they're old Varathanes or spray paint cans or even volatiles in spray cans that are dangerous. And so those collect and they sit there for maybe 10, 20 years, and they were never discarded by previous instructors or by previous programs. And so we get this amalgam of hazardous chemicals that have sat around and either corroded or no longer safe as an oil-based compound, and we haven't got rid of those. And so we need to be mindful that we do regular inventory checks. Maybe we discard what we're not using. We need to check our study plans, what we're using in our schools, and validate that the equipment that we're using and the products that we're using align with that, right? And if they're not, we need to work with our school safety officer, or we need to work with our hygiene officer for our chemical safety and validate collection and get that stuff out of the school so it doesn't sit there and build up. Lastly, we need to, work align with our agencies or corporations, companies that are out there that are taking our students. What are they asking for? What are we seeing? We talked earlier in the last presentation from Tom about receiving these tools and equipment that are unguarded and come into our place. And we see the same thing. We see universities and colleges that will give us chemicals in the science programs, for example, and we need to validate that those things belong or that they need to be taken care of. Maybe we write for a CTE grant and we get a router table, but did anybody consider the cost of installation or safety guarding that equipment when it comes in? And sometimes that's more than the equipment itself. So we need to do a diligent job bringing our admins in and also our school boards and informing that, hey, there may be ancillary costs to these programs or this equipment or these chemicals we're using, just so that we can make it a safe environment.
Yeah, I concur with what everybody said, and I would listen to the concerns of your students and your teachers, because they will often identify hazards. And if you aren't listening to them, they're not going to bring them forward. So you need to address those as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much for these awesome insights and answers. I'm going to move to our second question, which is, how do you establish a safe work zone around a piece of equipment? And I guess more directly, like I have seen maybe one or two of the CTE classrooms. When you walk in, how do you know that that's, sometimes we see tape on the floor, like how would you recommend they do it, and what criteria do you use to establish that safe work zone?
I'll throw in here.
You want to look at the type of tool or piece of equipment. What are the hazards associated with it? I think tape, paint, stay outside this zone, physical barriers, because sometimes in schools we get people who are horsing around. So the physical barrier is probably the best choice.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to accidentally stumble into or get pushed into an area. But it really does matter what kind of tool you're talking about. Like with welding, you want people far away from those weld areas. Sparks go a long ways. You want to contain the sparks as best you can with some kind of physical barrier.
And again, I agree with Cindy. The different hazards associated with the function of the machines or the tools. Now, even with the robotics coming out, they have up the actual physical guards so that nobody can get in there, depending on, again, the machine and the hazards. But I would go with Cindy, the more of a physical barrier versus something on the deck or the ground with young people, to stop them from going into those danger zones.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with a question. I'm sorry. A question that appeared in the chat. How large a zone is recommended for table saws, especially considering kickback?
You know, honestly, I don't know of a number, but I would say with table saw, there's the kickback. One of the reasons why table saw actually you pop your slot slightly to the left, away from where the kickback would happen. I would look at the placement of the machine and consider that up against a wall or a surface where, you know, people aren't there. I don't know a number. I honestly don't. But kickbacks, yeah, significant.
My understanding on that is it's the size of the feedstock plus a range of free movement. So let's take a 4x8 sheet of plywood. If you're feeding that to a table saw, you need to have probably the 8 foot plus 2 foot for maneuverability in the person. Excuse me. If you're running a 16 foot 2x4 for whatever reason, you're going to have 16 foot plus 2 feet for maneuverability. So you've got to have
Okay.
your feed spock and depth.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, and I think educating your instructors that if you're changing your feedstock, you got to change your safety zone and to be flexible there, but to always be thinking about the safety aspect of what you're doing.
One of the quiet things I think that's overlooked frequently is we get excited about bringing equipment into CTE programs or anywhere in the school for that matter. But one of the things that's commonly overlooked is people get all excited. Wow, we got this new equipment. They get the pat on the back. The community's excited, and they never look at the manufacturer's recommendations.
Right.
There's always specifications. There's always guidance, and I would say that, and we got big, powerful, dangerous tools if they're not used correctly. If we're not following those manufacturer recommendations, we're just holding ourselves open for liability and potential for injury in the schools.
Yeah, agreed. And I think if it's a new piece of equipment, a new process, it's really important for, the shop supervisor, the school district to perform a job hazard analysis, which would then help them step through the entire process, look at the other processes that are in the shop as well, with maybe like changing the layout. But a JHA will also help them evaluate, every step of the process along the way on their from getting the material to feeding it into the machine and using it, but it will outline like all the hazards, all the different controls that need to be in place, any trainings, then also any PPE that they might need to safely get that job done. So can't stress enough how important JHAs are, especially for new processes that are coming up.
Thanks so much. I'm going to move us to, we have a few questions popping up in the chat. I think I'd like to move us on through the questions that we've already had and then back up and address those as we have time. Next question is, when is non-skid surfacing required? I'm thinking about where people should set up CTE equipment. Anyway, any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's some requirements in the Washington Administrative Code and the machine safety standard. So, that you have to make sure that if you're working around those dangerous machines, and this is coming straight from the WAC, that the surfaces are protected, with non-slip matting, grading, non-slip composition flooring, and then or some other effective flooring treatment. And it also depends, on the specific operation or task that might be occurring. So if you have, water that's getting on the floor quite frequently, that's going to be a factor, or other materials, like if you're around a CNC machine where metal working fluids might be accumulating on surfaces and making, the area slippery. So just kind of have to look at the different activities that are occurring, the equipment, the materials that are used, and then just evaluate the current flooring, and then make sure that you have non-slip materials and other I guess products that can be adhered to the floor to make it non-slip.
To add to what Brandon, excellent point, Brandon, thank you. To add to that, we can always default back to housekeeping, right? Implementation of our structured learning plan, whether we're doing activities in the shop or not. I've gone into various classrooms and, the housekeeping isn't taking place the way it needs to. And so we have debris or we have dust or, water on the floor around a water jet. And so those surfaces could be maintained properly and not even have to have the non-skid surface if they were cleaned and appropriately taken care of. So we got to make sure we build that into our school plans and that's being part of our educational regimen.
Okay, thank you, everyone. The next question has been posed on several occasions, which is, should school CTE safety standards be more restrictive than L&I standards? And if so, how would you do this?
I guess
Yeah,
I would say my answer would be, it depends. You need to look at your audience. You are dealing with young people and there are some additional hazards that come with that. They lack life experience and a natural sense of caution. They're invincible when they're young. So I would say in many cases, as Tom discussed in the machine guarding, it may not be required by the WAC, but because you are working with young, inexperienced people, you should consider guarding stuff that's not required to be guarded. I think there are probably a lot of other areas that is also applicable to.
Yeah, and adding to that, the students that are placed at different work sites, they are covered under the Washington Industrial Safety and Health Act, so they do have to, be covered under the L&I requirements. And there are certain jobs and activities that youth workers just cannot perform under both like the L&I rules and then also the OSHA rules. And I'll drop a link into the chat that kind of explains all those different jobs that are off limits essentially. But there's a lot of them, and there were more than what I had expected. So, if any of the CTE tasks or jobs involve any of these, I think it needs a really careful supervision and evaluation by the program and also the supervisors, LHJs, etc. So some of these jobs could be done. I'm not gonna say jobs, but maybe some of these tasks by students could be done when they're not working, but there has to be careful evaluation, supervision, PPE controls, etc. So anyway, check out those links in the chat.
So I'd like to add a couple more things here, maybe curl some ears in the audience, but one of the things we, being a risk manager, is we need to consult with our risk insurer, and we need to validate that our coverage in our school or district is managing what we're doing in the school. Sometimes we bring in new equipment or maybe we've got advanced shop classes, robotics, for example. I mean, now we're getting the demolition robots, right? And so everybody gets excited, but what are all the precautions for that? Have we done a review, like Brand was saying, JHA, and is that covered by the school? Are we even supposed to be carrying this out? Are we, we double checking our environment to make sure that, hey, we're equipped to have this, and are we operating in a manner that is going to be safe for the kids?
And I'll just remind you, I think that's a great place to bring in L&I's consultation services, because they will be a separate set of eyes that will look at it maybe a little differently than you. And they can come in and look at small scope, like I've got one new piece of equipment, or they can look at broad scope. I want you to look at my whole shop area and tell me what's wrong. You've got safety and you've got industrial hygiene. They can come together. The scope is really set by the requester.
Well, Cindy, that was a wonderful seg into the last question I have, which is what on-site consultation is available for a CTE classroom, and are there resources you would recommend?
Absolutely. L&I consultation services. Go to the lni.wa.gov, look for consultation. Also, I think Becky, you have my contact points. That's for Region 3, but if you get to them and you're in a different region, they will get you to the right people, trust me.
And to add to that, some of the LHJs might also have the ability or capacity to assist with those evaluations. If the program has funding, they could hire industrial hygiene consultants as well to help evaluate those, but it does come at a cost.
UW
Here in
has
Western-
an excellent program to bring out IH consultants. But yes, it does come at a cost.
Yeah, and then in addition, at least here in Western Washington, we have the University of Washington Field Research and Consultation Group, which can also perform free evaluations for employers in Washington State. There may be other programs at other universities and colleges throughout the state, but I'm unaware of the other ones. I've just been in contact with the UW Field Research Consultation Group. And if you're not careful, they might make it into a research project as well. So you might get some really good information out of it and, work with a student as well from UW. So it could be great all around. Other than that, I think those are the good resources. Oh, and the internal school district environmental health and safety staff might be good connectors as well. So.
Yeah, I would throw in also, yes, I work for an ESD and every ESD operates differently, but some of the ESDs do have career connected learning and CTE specialists. Skill tech centers in the larger urban districts also have resource, and they moderate that as a consultation with some of the companies that are out there searching for our students. They're leaving high school, ready to go into CTE fields, STEM. So those individuals may be able to transition and provide some of that guidance for what's going to be wanted or needed, as well as help the schools transition if they're out of compliance.
All right, thank you so much. And these contacts we will certainly provide with our notes from the workshop. And I'm going to back up and go through some of the questions that we've been accumulating. One question is, one of our high schools is now building an electric car. What should we know or look for in terms of high voltage safety?
It'd be our consulting group to look at electrical.
So high voltage would be anything considered over the threshold of 600 volts. And so when you get into, automotive hybrid, for example, those can go up to 800. They start at 400. Anything over, household 120 is usually, not good to play with. But there should be an awareness, and we need to verify that the program is ready to handle and deal with that. We need to find out whether or not we're dealing with what type of battery resource we're dealing with an electric car, right? There's all kinds of associated hazards with lithium and lithium ion batteries and storage and charging capacities, as well as ventilations, even for lead cell. So that's kind of a whole program review. There is some guidance that's out there from some of the universities that have done some of these programs. Another consideration is does the shop space have enough room to even work on these things? A lot of times I'm seeing these come into a school and they're shoehorning these into a facility, and they may take up, instructional space rather. And for this electric car that just sits there for 8 months out of the 9 months of the year. So, there's just a lot of validation that needs to happen with those programs, and if it's really a good fit for the program and the school.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for equipment that is stored, then pulled out, movable? So safety use zones need to move to the use area, permanent markings versus temporary markings, cones, etc.
So I would say, make sure you put some thought into where you're going to use it, because all use areas are not created equal. If you can't put up temporary barriers, make sure you put up temporary barriers. Cones with tape or chains is a good way to set up a barrier that's very movable. But think about it. Many of us, we decide we want to use a piece of portable equipment, we pull it out, we don't put in any thought about what else is going on in the area and the hazards we may be introducing.
Yeah, and since it's portable and, you know, pulled out maybe frequently or infrequently, there could be unique power requirements for it. So, you know, you might have an electrical cord now that's out in sort of the middle of the floor versus a more stationary equipment that might be hardwired in, or it might have a dedicated like drop plug for it or something. But yeah, think about, yeah, just like Cindy mentioned, the full planning of how you're going to use that equipment, you know, the layout and feedstock and everything, and then also any other accessories that might go along with it, and also the power cord and other things.
Yeah. Are you creating a trip hazard? Do you have to daisy chain your extension cords to get power to it? Those are not okay. Those are not things you want to be doing.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to my colleagues here that identified a question I missed up in the queue. Can you summarize guarding requirements for table saws?
Yeah, first thing is, make sure that when you're using your board that you're ripping or cutting, is up against the fence, and hold it in place with blocks, hand blocks, or push sticks. Keep your hand away from the blade. Also make sure the blade is guarded. Don't have the teeth, other than the teeth up in the top and the bottom, just above the top of the board. The higher you go, the more you're gonna want to pull the board up, get a kickback. Also, body position out of this just slightly over to the left, or the side of the board would have a kickback. And like Jerry pointed out, it was real nice on the length of the zone in the back. I guess that would be my summary.
And I think adding to that, there's a couple accessories for the table saw, like the riving knife that would help keep the boards coming back together after you actually make the cut. That will help to prevent kickback, as well as the pawls that you can attach to the riving knife that would then also have teeth, and they can also keep boards from kicking back towards the operator. So a couple accessories that might also help with guarding and then also kickback as well.
I would add, if you're operating a large school program, small for that matter, if you've got a large piece of stock, there needs to be a teamwork worked out or developed. Who's going to be leading, feeding the piece, who's going to be receiving it, who's going to be the lead person that's going to be making out the calls to lift, push, pull. All of that can play into the factors of whether or not a piece of wood gets loose and you have a kickback or, you know, something else. So definitely communication.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How do you define, or what criteria determine if ventilation is required?
So I guess it depends on the process. What are you doing? If you're welding and there's smoke, you need ventilation. If you're using chemicals, the off gas, you need ventilation.
Okay.
Because you are not getting exposure assessments typically in these schools. So you want to use your engineering controls often and wisely. Ventilation is never a bad thing. It helps you out every time.
I guess a follow-up point of this, the question was also related to the size or weight of particulates. So talking about removing particulates from grinding or wood processes.
So the more respirable, so the smaller the particulate size, the more critical ventilation is. Heavy, big chunks are going to fall to the ground. They're not going to be respirable. So you don't need ventilation. You want that ventilation placed appropriately near the point of generation. If you are grinding on granite, that's silica, or anything that contains silica, grinding is very respirable. Sanding is even more respirable. So the particulate size is small and you want good ventilation. Lots of pieces of equipment now has the ventilation, has a vacuum hooked right up to it. It contains the dust so you don't get an explosive dust issue, but also it contains anything, it helps contain or limit the amount of particulate that goes airborne.
I would add to that, it very much, Cindy, yes, it depends. You know, in the last few years, we've wandered into this 3D printer and CNC router business and laser etchers and even you know, fabric presses, right? So if you're creating an objectionable odor, a fume, a dust, a particulate, even if you're on a metal lathe and you've got oil, or you know, your cutting oils are getting steamed off when they're cutting, that's kind of why there's a general rule. If you're creating these things, you need to have a direct outside exhaust ventilation in a CTE program. I'm sure everybody on this panel has all walked into a room and seen one of the devices I just named off that doesn't have ventilation, and that's inappropriate. It's going to cause respiration issues and or irritation to the occupants within that space, and so that's why the code asks for direct ventilation to the outside.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing additional questions in the chat. So for all of our participants, would love to have you put any other questions you might have while we have this amazing panel of experts here. So I'll take another minute to see if anybody has anything else they want to add. Well, I am not seeing anything else. If there are any parting words of wisdom, our panel, oh, actually, Ellen, question, here we go. I spoke too soon. I'm trying to figure out the student insurance for students in a CTE program. This was posed to Ellen. Any thoughts on that?
So that neither Tom or I have any experience in industrial insurance, but I would say send you to a risk manager so we could provide you that information on a point of contact in risk management who could talk to you about the insurance piece. Also, if you have a POC for your account number, that person can probably answer questions.
I would again redirect to contact your district's risk insurer. There's primarily 2 risk insurers within the state of Washington for the majority of public schools. At some point, they've underwritten or understand what each and every program out there is for liability and whether or not there's coverage within your school. And so that will be a discussion between your administrator and the risk insuring agent to determine whether or not that coverage is present or if it's adequate.
Good answer.
Okay, we have worked our way through the questions. So I guess I will turn it over to our panelists to see if you have any other parting words of wisdom before we wrap up.
I I think I can add, if you haven't been to the OSPI CTE website, there's a whole wealth of information about that particular program, and how the approvals are actually done. You can also pull up a spreadsheet with all of the different approved courses throughout the state, which is really interesting. So you can see sort of what, industries the students might be focusing on, the career clusters, et cetera. And so might give you a good idea of some of the general hazards that might be out there, especially in your county, or if you're in an LHJ, you can look that up and see what's going on. So, but there's a lot of good information on the OSPI website. I'll say that maybe for next year for the fall workshop, it could be great to have a OSPI person actually summarize the program and provide a bit more information too. So check out the CTE website for, excuse me, more information. Thanks.
My parting words are, please take advantage of LNI's consultation service. You will not be disappointed. They're a great group of people and they're free.
I concur with Cindy.
Absolutely. It never hurts to ask a question, right? We're all trying to be in the process of education as educators for students. So ask those questions. If your administrator or your principal doesn't know, we have ESDs, right? We have OSPI, we have LNI, we have DOH, we have these other ready resources. There's listservs, there's people, somebody will eventually get to your question, hopefully sooner than later, but there are resources out there if you can't find them immediately.
All right, thank you again, everyone. I think we are just so lucky to have such a wealth of technical knowledge and resources. And I want to thank you all again so much for volunteering to be on the panel. And think I will turn it back over to you, Kara, if you'd like to wrap us up.
Absolutely. Thank you to Becky and to all of our panelists. Becky, you gathered an amazing wealth of talent here, and this is so valuable for everybody here on this call.